Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure the weather outside you already have seen it's pretty muggy, but it's really glad to see that the room is much more vibrant. It's a totally different outcome over here. So thank you for showing up early this morning. BloombergNEF is a research house, and we do research on a lot of different topics, as you can see up on your screen. And we are kind of in a middle of a lot of different transitions. And being a part of BNF, I get exposed to a lot of new insights. And you can see from the sectors that we cover, from clean energy to transport to metals and minings to automation and sustainability. We do get to connect the dots across various sectors in our day-to-day job. So I thought I'll share some of our findings from the electric vehicle side today to give you an overview of what we are seeing, globally. But before I talk about that, I mean, when you think about auto sector, there is actually a lot of challenges that our sector faces currently, and our challenges are related to, congestion. So there's a lot of congestion in our markets. I need not talk about air pollution. As you can see, you already are seeing it outside. And then we also have a lot of energy security issues, like 84% of all our crude imports or of all our crude was imported in 2019. But if you step back and think about it, then actually these are not global challenges. So not just India-related challenges. These are actually global challenges. So everybody around the world is concerned about these. And if you think about how people are managing this, what are automakers doing it? Then automakers are trying to address this situation by working on CASE. CASE, as it stands for Connected, Autonomous, Shared, and Electric Vehicles. They believe that they can reduce congestion, urban emissions, and also they can help reduce import bills in various countries. So while there are several acronyms out there in the world, CASE is the one that was proposed by Daimler and has been the most used one currently. And CASE is not a new concept. As you can see, connected vehicles were always there with us in the form of, so not connected, so shared electric and autonomous vehicles were always there with us, even several decades ago. But the new case that we're talking about, it is all about removing the guideways so that the costs can be brought down and it can be adopted at a much faster level. So with that said, I will be talking about CASE in my opening presentation. I'll be starting with connected cars. As you can see, the new share of connected cars, it has been rising quite rapidly. In fact, if you look at this chart, then in the past 8 or 9 years, the total number of cars on the road with telekinetics embedded telematics have been increasing at quite a rapid pace, roughly 8 times in the past 8 to 9 years. And this means that more than 1 in every 4 cars currently has embedded telematics into it. But the automakers are not happy with that. They're actually wanting to accelerate that. They want 100% of embedded connectivity within their vehicles. In fact, as you can see in this chart, there are several automakers that have targets for 100% connected cars, of selling 100% connected cars. There are, in general, most of the manufacturers have a target of having at least 90% sales of connected cars by the year 2025. And that is quite important for us. But then the reason is, why do they want to do this? And the reason is because connected cars, or the data from the cloud from the auto sector, can help us in many ways. It can help us design better cars. It can help us design better mobility services, better shared services. And lastly, we can also share, or at least these automakers, they can also sell this data to other third-party owners who can produce various apps or provide other services based on the data that's gathered. For example, insurance companies, they could be using your driving statistics to determine what could your insurance premium be in the next, let's say, few years. Then let's switch over to autonomous. Autonomous has various degrees of autonomy in it, from level 1 to level 5. So level 1 is mostly just controlling acceleration and deceleration, or just some steering controls, whereas level 4 and 5 are fully automatic vehicles. You just sit in there and you reach your destination. But our view as a research house is that this is not going to take up very soon. It will take some time. In fact, 2030 is only when we see some form of automation coming up in India. Coming up globally. In India, I mean, there's a marker over there for India, but actually India is negligible over here, just because it is not possible for us to have, I mean, the kind of infrastructure we have, the roads we have, it is just not possible to have autonomous vehicles. So let me skip that quickly and then jump to the more interesting bits, which is shared and electric. So on the shared side, if you look at the number of digital hailing apps and their statistics. So on the left-hand side chart shows number of riders or number of users of the ride-sharing services. And it has increased quite a bit from roughly around 600 million users. It has increased now to roughly close to about 1.2 billion users. Okay. And on the right-hand side, you see the number of drivers associated with it. So the number of drivers has also, almost doubled in the given time frame. So there's actually a lot of activity happening on the shared services. And the reason why it is happening is because of the number of companies that have come up in this sector. From Uber, which started up in 2010, we have seen that there are a number of companies that have come up in this segment across the world, some serving local, some serving global, having global ambitions. And this chart stops at 2017, because if I produced a chart for 2018 and 19, it will just go through the roof. But the point is that there are a number of companies which have just flooded this market. Another way to look at how successful is a particular industry is to see how much investments it is attracting and from where. So this is the disclosed investments made by automakers in digital hailing companies. And on the bottom, all the way to the bottom, you see My Taxi, which is mostly a European-based taxi company, which has got 100% of its funds, about 13 million, from an automaker. But on the top, you see Grab, which has about $1.4 billion, and just over 30% of it is coming from an automaker. Actually, an even extreme example is Didi. With $1.6 billion of investment, only 8% it comes from an automaker. The rest comes from other sectors. So other big tech companies, vision and investment funds, they are getting interested in it. Even oil and gas companies are getting interested. So the competition is heating up. It is not just within the company, within the sector. People from outside the sector are also interested in it. What we believe is why shared is so important for us is because the level of electrification that it can achieve will be much faster and much higher than what we can see on passenger cars. Our forecast is that by 2040, only 30% of passenger cars could be electric, but over 70% of all shared rides or shared cars could be electric in the same time frame. But shared has its own challenges as well. This was a study done in the US, in the areas of San Francisco, Boston, and a few major urban areas in the US. And the question that was asked to a number of participants was, what would you do if ride-hailing companies were not available? So while a number of them said that they would take fewer rides, you bike or walk to the offices, uh, the last second one, it shows that they would have taken a taxi, conventional taxi. So that's a positive point. But on the extreme right, you see that people might have taken public transport as well if ride-hailing services were not available. So this is a double-edged sword, because this is becoming a greater concern in some of the countries or some cities where they have spent a lot of infrastructure in building public transport networks. But if people are not using them because of ride-hailing services, then that's actually something that the local governments are not happy with. So let me quickly move to the electric vehicles part of the discussion today. So on the electric vehicle side, as you can see, this is the total number of global electric vehicles sold till now. The first million vehicles, it took a pretty long and slow, it was a pretty slow and arduous process. It pretty long to get them, get us reach that target. But the next million vehicles were sold in just 18 months. The next million in less than 18 months, in less than 1 year. And now we are selling, between late 2017 and 2019, we have sold close to 5 million electric vehicles globally today. And the EV share of new sales is rising in many markets as well. So initially, a few years back, we were just talking about how different countries or different markets are reaching 1 to 2% levels of new sales in electric vehicles. But now, as you can see, recently been 2018 onwards, after 2017, the market is actually starting to pick up, led primarily by China. And if you move ahead, then we believe that very different EV adoption curves will be visible in the next 3 to 5 years. No longer we are going to talk about 1 to 2%. We are actually going to talk about countries achieving 5 to 10% of new sales through EVs. And China, obviously, looking much ahead for inching further towards 15%. India remains relatively flat in the near term. I'm sure we'll discuss that in the course of the day today. So I'm not going to touch more about that. But what we believe is that the primary reason why EVs are not so prominently sold in India is because of the cost barrier. Most of the cars, so we did some calculation, and more than half of the vehicles sold in India in 2018 were actually priced less than $8,000. And we don't believe that a vehicle with 200-mile range would be comparable to a relevant ICE vehicle by 2030. Some vehicles with lower ranges, so if you convert, instead of 200 miles, if you do 200 kilometers, then yes, they could get competitive with their ICE counterparts in the coming few years. But for a 200 mile, it will still take some time. And that's a global benchmark that we use to estimate our forecast. So that's why we have used this metric over here. But as I said, slowly and steadily, things will change. We believe that medium and large and SUVs, vehicles will get competitive with their ICE counterparts in the next 3 to 4 years in parts of US and Europe. Then US small cars will start getting competitive in the next 5 to 7 years. And slowly and steadily, we believe that India, because of rapidly declining battery prices, we feel that this will actually lead to a big adoption of electric vehicles in India in 2030 onwards. It could happen before, if the battery prices continue to fall, if the consumers are willing to buy vehicles with lower ranges, and if there is a policy system that is created around this. So so there is a lot of momentum that we are seeing being built up by 2030. Most of the countries will have EVs as achieving parity with their ICE counterparts. And what our analysis shows that between 2035 and 40, there will be a time, or actually it could be brought forward, but there will be a time when actual number of EVs sold every year will increase the total number of ICE vehicles. So that's a big benchmark. That's a big inflection point that is going to be visible in our working lifetime in some sense. But most of the things that are happening right now, although they have been policy driven, it is still going to be policy driven just because of the sheer economics and infrastructure requirements. But what we are seeing is that countries are actually moving away from direct subsidies to more mandates and targets. For example, China has an NEV target or an EV mandate, Europe has CO2 emission targets, and US has CAFE regulations. Just talking about Europe, we have very strict CO2 emission targets. For example, in the next 10, 12 years, they want to reduce their emission by 37.5%. In order to meet those emission targets, it's believed that about 35% of all their fleet, the entire fleet, should be converted to electric. And if you're just using hybrids as well, then it could actually be close to 50%. So that is the kind of signals that we are getting in this market at this moment. And it's not just national policies, even city policies are becoming very important. These are some of the total sales figures of EVs in various countries, European countries and Japan. And this is the sale in some of the Chinese cities in the past year. So the first two are Shenzhen and Shanghai, and these two cities are selling more electric vehicles than some of the bigger countries, some of the smaller countries that we see in Europe. In fact, 18% or just about 1/5 of all the electric vehicles sold in the world last year, and this is cars, by the way, not electric vehicles, when I say it is cars, 1/5 of them were sold in just 6 Chinese cities. I'm sure if there was some mandate in Delhi or Mumbai, we would see something very similar to what, at least on the volume side, we'll see something very similar to this. I'll lastly mention Korea, which recently announced a 50 billion plan to lead the future of mobility in the country. And they have set up some very aggressive targets. For example, they want to ramp up their sales of electric vehicles to about a third in the next 11 years. They also want their own companies to sell more electric vehicles outside, from 4% now to 10% in the next 11 years. And the way they are doing it, they are trying to improve the charging infrastructure. They are wanting to have more charging locations, increasing from 5,500 to about 15,000 till 2030. They are also giving some cash subsidies. They want to extend it beyond 2022. And they also are thinking about putting a ban on ICE vehicles, like what we have seen in some European countries. So it's still a proposal, but they're thinking about it. And lastly, what they're doing is they're also thinking about having an electric mandate for fleet operators in the country, which will actually, or which we think should drive the electric vehicle market in the first few years. Soon after these targets were announced, the President Moon of South Korea, he said that he wants the country to be the best and the first and the best in the world of EVs. So I guess the question for us now is, what does it take in India to be, if not the best, then at least amongst the best, amongst the largest, amongst the most innovative, and amongst the most successful EV markets in the world? With that, I'll end my presentation and hope it makes a good segue into the next discussion and the next presentation as well. Thank you.